Hi everyone, welcome to the God Attachment Healing Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Landa. This podcast is dedicated to helping Christians who want to understand why they relate to God, themselves, and the church in the way that they do. I explore how our early childhood experiences with our parents influence how we relate. I discuss how we can find healing from the pain, confusion, doubt, fear, and anger experienced in these relationships. If you're interested in learning more about your attachment style and how to heal from the pains and struggles you've experienced, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to the show. I'm happy you're here. All right, everyone. Welcome to the God Attachment Healing Podcast. And I am excited about our topic today with Mrs. Sharon Wegman. And we are going to be discussing the topic of trauma, attachment within the church. Sharon does a lot of work with ministry leaders and educating them on trauma and the impact of the body. And one of the big reasons why I thought this interview was so important is because I think often, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, Sharon, that often in church ministry, we place so much emphasis on the spiritual aspect, which is very important, and even on the thinking aspect. But we often forget the emotional and the physical aspects of trauma and just the healing process in general. And I think this would be a good opportunity for us to kind of share with the audience about how all of those things kind of mix with each other, and it creates for healing and also for a lot of pain and hurt. So it's really using the skills that we have learned throughout our time in counseling and trying to educate and heal and help with ministry leaders and Christians in general.
Right.
So well, Sharon, welcome to the show. I think right now it's a good opportunity to just kind of give you the floor and share a little bit about yourself. Hopefully I didn't miss anything.
Sure. Sure. My name is Sharon Wegman. I have been a clinical counselor for about 28 years, but I was raised in the world of Christianity and the church, so I understand and have been involved in it from as young as I can possibly remember. So I understand all the dynamics tied to Christianity, but I also understand all of the science tied to healing the mind and body, which are very connected to the spiritual piece. And I think sometimes the church focuses only on the spiritual piece and not on the soul portion, which is the mind, the will, and emotions, and the body. And so I got to a certain point in the process. It really started a lot during the COVID shutdown, which was we were trying to figure out how do we help the pastors in our area who were going underwater with all of the problems they were dealing with and not having the skills to handle all the trauma that was coming into our offices. So that's how it was birthed, because we just wanted to help whoever we could help. And they were dealing with so much trauma that we said, hey, let me help you. And that's how this all started.
Wow, that's awesome. Is that ministry from a church, or do you have your own counseling site and then your referred people there?
Yeah, so I have a counseling business, and I have 6 other counselors with me, and we're going to be growing. We just bought a new space, and the end result is we just want to be a hub of healing in the Christian community from a licensed professional counselor point of view, in that we have done extensive training to understand how to bring healing to people separate from how the church necessarily understands bringing about healing. And we really want to merge those two together. So out of this counseling agency, which is called Wellspring Solutions, we're whole self therapists on Instagram and Facebook, how that we like to birth not just things that are therapeutic, but coaching programs like maybe trauma-informed teachers, trauma-informed business owners, and mine is trauma-informed ministry leaders.
That's great. That's great. And this question kind of came up as we were talking about this, that there's always like a push towards pursuing the profession of counseling, right? And I'm sure we have, either different or similar stories, but and I think the audience would be interested too, to kind of see what led you to pursue counseling.
You know what? Most of the time people say oh, I just found it interesting. But we find it interesting because of our own history that we need to
Hmm.
heal.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So I was that individual in the college that I went to where people would come to my room and tell me their problems. And I was
Mm.
like, well, I guess I should be a counselor.
Right.
But the end result, if you back that up, now I can say it was me trying to understand my own self and the things that happened to me in my past.
Hmm.
But we become those wounded healers, just like Jesus. Through the healed scars that we have, we can impart healing to other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the same thing that happened with me. I came from a divorced home, grew up in the church, Southern Baptist, and all of that focus on the mind so much. And
Mm.
even some behaviorists, right? Some behavioralism in there as well. And all of that was at struggle and in conflict with what I was feeling and what I was experiencing emotionally and physically. So that then became kind of the new orientation. So the last 2 to 3 years, I've been more focused on trauma. So it's been really cool to see your page and see you grow it, and just you have great content. So I'll definitely put that link up on the site here. But yeah, so since we're talking about trauma, we're talking about the church, we're talking about other aspects of this, including attachment. I think first let's start with God's alarm system, right? God created us. He made us perfect in how our bodies are to respond to stressful situations, to things that are traumatic. And it's God's alarm system. So, how does the mind and body record trauma?
Yeah, it's so interesting when you begin to understand the brain and how God has really hardwired us to have that alarm system to protect us from future harm. But the end result in the unredeemed state that we're in is
Mm,
it really freezes up. And so, we talk about trauma like that amygdala part of our brain just freezes up. We cannot make
mhm,
good decisions or we move into our fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response
mm,
because we can't connect information well. And so large chunks of information are disconnected by the chemicals released by trauma. Logic, reason, the ability to stay focused, the
mhm,
ability to make good decisions, to put information together. All of that is disrupted by a trauma response that initially happens. It can happen through a really big event, like a car accident or an assault, but it can happen through a series of smaller events, like maybe having to change schools frequently as a child,
mm,
or and you talk a lot about attachment issues. Maybe
mhm,
two parents engaging completely different, or you never know when one parent's going to be off or one, that kind of small traumas build up in our brain and create a lot of trauma responses to things that maybe one person doesn't experience, but another person does experience it because they haven't experienced the safety of an environment that helps reduce the trauma. So, car accident with one person, huge trauma response and ongoing struggles being in a car.
mhm,
But a different person who has a car accident and has a really caring, nurturing
mhm,
environment,
mhm.
reduction of the trauma, and may not be triggered again to ride in a car, doesn't think about it again because the two different environments tied to your attachment
Mm.
focus really impact how we encode and absorb the trauma.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think the number one buffer for how people recuperate during trauma is the social support that they have, be it
Absolutely.
before, be it after. The key is that they get support. And for many people, they experience that. And maybe even, to your point about some people get very traumatized by that experience, but there's not always an external reaction, right? Sometimes just internalize, oh, it didn't really affect me. And then comes other times down the road where the body starts to respond in ways that they didn't expect. And then, where's this coming from? Because they never resolved that
Absolutely.
trauma, right?
Yeah, and we say it's almost like you have a clock ticking. And
Mm,
if you don't resolve it, it will come out in your physical health or your mental health eventually. Like
hmm.
people who are absorbing the trauma into their body and don't think they have a reaction, it is impacting them, but it's going to come out in their physical health, or it's going to come out in their mental health and or even their relationships, right? With their
Mm-hmm.
spouse or their children.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and people around people who are traumatized don't understand because they're just reacting, right? The person who's traumatized just reacting to whatever comes their way, and obviously affecting relationships. You know, another interesting point about the trauma piece is most significant trauma, and I hesitate a little bit to say it because obviously everyone responds differently, but most of the severe responses are interpersonal, right? So anything that has to do with a relationship, because it's typically people that we're close to or that we love. So people that the source of love is also the source of pain. And when that goes on and on, like you were saying earlier, when it's repeated instances
Mhm.
of offense or damage or hurt, then that can create these traumatic responses, which is our next question. Like, what kind of responses does trauma trigger in relationships?
Sure. I mean, a lot more, if we have a couple, we're talking about understanding both of their traumas because their traumas
Mm,
intersect with each other.
it's true.
But maybe you just have an individual and it impacts how they relate to their workplace, their coworkers, their friendships. It's all relational because as you go back to that attachment piece, the idea is that we didn't have that healthy environment when it came to people when we had to deal with difficult situations. So we tend to go into our fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. But
Mm,
if we had those healthy, nurturing people when we're going through difficult times, we're not as likely to react. And it's the
mm,
rare person, it's
mm-hmm.
the very rare person that had that safe, nurturing environment for both people in a relationship. You might have one person who had it, one person who didn't, but it's rare. It's very rare.
Yeah, yeah.
Not going to come to counseling, that's for sure, if they're both that way.
Right. Yeah, that's so true. And obviously, when we're talking about our experiences here, looking at trauma responses, just people who are responding to, their bodily sensations and how that comes up in relationships. What's been the most things that you've encountered, most issues that you've encountered in your own counseling? Because today a lot of people use the word trauma and they talk about something that may not be as in comparison to someone else. They might say, oh, I was so traumatized that my teacher didn't give me the grade that I wanted. I work with college students, so something like that,
Yes.
as opposed to someone else who grew up with abusive parents, right? So I feel like that word is thrown out a lot.
It's used a lot with the
Mm-hmm.
younger population. It's almost like, oh, that's trauma. And I'm like, no, 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 it's
Right.
not.
Right.
So yeah, because even I have college age students, that are my children, and I'm like,
Mm,
they know all the terms,
yeah.
but they can't actually define what it has done.
Mm,
So yeah, I mean, I'm not saying a bad score couldn't trigger a trauma response
mm-hmm.
if you're a perfectionist who was held to a high standard in your
Mm,
childhood. That could, but
mm-hmm.
that's not necessarily defining trauma. Trauma
Mm-hmm.
would be that visceral response where our body goes into a freeze mode. It goes into more of I almost feel, I call it the whoomp, like
Mm.
whoomp, where you kind of feel that it's settling down in you. You're stuck in your head. You're obsessing in your head, or
Mm.
you need to go do something immediately to fix it. Right. So a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
need to go do something immediately to fix it, which is that fight response. Or so you're usually going, if it's really trauma, you're usually going to feel it in your body. But we have a lot of people who are very numb to
Mm-hmm.
trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and so they are not able to define when their body is triggered. Probably a lot of my clients who are had severe trauma are much more dissociated, numbed out from their pain. And so when I say what's happening in your body right now, they'll often say, I don't know. Because
Mm.
they've learned to repress it a lot. And so part of healing of trauma is just become a lot more body aware because it is God's alarm system, God's signal that something's wrong. And if you've learned to turn it off as a result of the family system that you grew up in,
Mm-hmm.
then what happens is you find yourself constantly in situations that are very upsetting and you're like, how does this keep happening? It's because you
Mm.
turned off your alarm system
Yeah.
and you are not recognizing when something bad is going to happen. Where somebody who's turned on their alarm system's like, oh, red flag, red flag. The other person's like,
Hmm.
what red flag? I don't know what you're talking
Right.
about, right? They have dissociated and numbed and turned that off
Hmm.
because they had to. They had to in their childhood.
Yeah, yeah. And then the process of them learning how to tune into their bodies to see where that pain is, right? A lot of times we'll say, where do you feel that pain? I don't know what you're talking about. It's just,
Right.
it's so foreign because I mean, it's always amazing to me how the body works to protect itself, and obviously God made us like that for a reason. When we look at scripture, I think this is one of those questions where like we look at scripture and we see how many things people experienced. Persecution is a big one. The sins against one another, family dynamics, so much trauma. I mean, a brother being sold into slavery. Like we see all of these different things. And I think in our background, at least for me, I don't think you've shared from what background you came from, Sharon, but mine was Southern Baptist. So I would look at maybe something like Joshua or Moses or someone like that who they experienced trauma, but hey, they got over it. And they just kept on serving the Lord, and that was it. And that's kind of the narrative that's portrayed, not realizing though that us, like them, were created as human beings who have the way that our body responds to trauma. So as we think about these examples, a question that comes up is, well, how did they deal with their trauma? We don't know, right? There was no process that's outlined for us. But I think it'd be interesting to explore some examples of uh, people in the Bible who did experience it.
Absolutely. I was thinking about that before you contacted me. The the one that I use a lot for a lot of my clients is well, Paul, when he was Saul, he was definitely a narcissist.
Yeah.
But he
Mm.
was definitely in fight mode all the time, right? But
Mm.
he had this encounter with God and he changed his name and became the person that God called him to be as a result of just a God experience. So
Mm.
sometimes we can see people moving out of their trauma because they have these amazing God experiences, but the renewing of the mind is what counts a lot. So
Mm.
the one that I think of a lot is I think Peter was often in fight mode.
Mm-hmm.
He was often reacting out of trauma to a wide variety of things, including the incident where he denied Christ 3 times. You
Mm.
know, he denied why he shut down. He went into freeze mode. He didn't know how to handle it. And so instead of handling it, he went into a trauma state. And I love what Jesus did later when he was resurrected. That morning where they were out there fishing, and he creates a fire by the shore, and they see that Peter sees that it's Jesus, and he comes back into shore, and they do the fish and all the other things. But
Mm.
what Jesus does for him is he heals his trauma. Why? He keeps encoding with him an opposite experience than what had last happened when he denied him.
Mm.
And the thing of that really sticks with me is he used coals, right? He's by the beach. He doesn't have coals. He
Mm.
brings coals to that setting because it's the same smell that was present when Peter denied him. And so he
Mm.
has the same smell present by bringing the coals there. And he's like, Jesus, he's like, Peter, do you love me?
Mm.
Right. And he keeps having him repeat, right? He's trying to create a new neural pathway using the coals that
Mm.
were present at the very place where Peter initially denied him in his trauma state. And I believe that God gives all of us opportunities to bring healing to those neural pathways. And parts of it are God and parts of it are natural things, like Jesus brought the coals,
Mm.
right? those are natural things that are going to change how our body responds to things.
Mm,
And so I think it's just so important to recognize that if we look at the encounters that Jesus does with people all throughout the New Testament, even at the woman at the well, he
mm,
went back and he kind of named her trauma, right? And by naming it, part of her was really set free. And we don't know the complete story, but she was changed by
mhm,
him naming the trauma and being present in the trauma. And that's what trauma counseling and trauma informed care is all about: is I'm present, I'm okay
mm,
with it, I'm present, I'm okay with it.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, no, that's a great point. And we get a real live illustration of that Jesus with his disciples, right? And yeah, specifically with Peter there, huh? And Paul, and then the encounter with Paul. So great examples there, great examples. Again, I just keep on going back to I wish I knew what that process looked like for them because it'd be cool. I guess we ask them in heaven, right? I guess we'll ask them in heaven. What was that like for you to experience all of that and then go through that process of healing? So we'll see how that goes. But I think you touched on one of our next questions, which was how to approach counseling trauma clients. And it's about that being present with them in a very real way, being okay with how they're responding to things, but also teaching them how to regulate their emotions, how to regulate their bodies and find safety in that. And that's what attachment theory is all about, providing safety for our
Yes.
clients in that relationship. But we encounter some problems with Christian clients sometimes because you may have experienced this before where a Christian client might come in and they don't want maybe the psychological, physical approach. They might just want prayer or scripture or something to that effect. And you working directly with churches, I wonder if you've encountered that, because it's like with medication, right? I'll have clients who are Christian and we've done all the natural ways to counter their anxiety, and
Mhm.
they've tried and they just can't get it to where they want it. So then it's okay, so well, what do you think about going to a psychiatrist and seeing what medication could look like? Oh no, I don't want to try that. I just don't want to be dependent, or I don't want that at all. There's this resistance to it. And I'm wondering if you've encountered that in trying to heal or work with trauma clients.
Sure. I do feel like the Christian community is slowly getting more open to
Mm-hmm.
understanding mental
I
health
agree.
issues. But in the world I grew up in the church, that was not the
Mm-hmm.
case. And so it's trying to literally help people become more educated with the science of understanding trauma, because I don't want to deny
Mm-hmm.
that this is actual facts,
Right.
right? And I don't want to deny someone the ability to have medicine to walk on crutches until they don't need that medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And some people might have to be on it forever. Have a thyroid problem, and if I don't get healed of it in this world, I'm going to have to constantly be on thyroid medicine because my pituitary gland doesn't produce what it needs to produce to affect my mood and my physical health. Well, the
Mm-hmm.
same thing is true for trauma victims. Often they need medicine as a bridge, as part of their healing process. Doesn't mean I don't think that people can't have enough healing of their trauma to eventually not use medicine. I do believe that because I
Mm-hmm.
understand the brain so much. But there's so much for them to work through that I consider as very compassionate for us as
Mm-hmm.
Christians to provide them options in their ability to get better.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's what it comes down to, just giving them as much options as possible and providing, some safety in that it's okay. Like this is okay.
Yes.
This is what the body needs right now, you know. Um, so what are some what working with trauma clients, Christian or not Christian, what are some of the challenges that we face in working with trauma clients? What are some things that you've seen that have been difficult or challenging as we work with clients?
I think for most people, there is a challenge if they have had significant trauma, like you referenced earlier. It takes a long time to build safety when they've never experienced safety in their life, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you've grown up in an environment where there was not emotional or physical or spiritual safety, um, the reality of it is the work will be slow when they come into therapy. And that's what I'm trying to coach pastors on, because I feel like sometimes pastors like, yeah, but they're not moving, they're not making decisions. And I'm like, but
Mm,
if you're sitting with them, you're healing them, right? You're
mm,
creating that safe, secure place over and over and over. And that's a huge part of their healing, is to create safe, secure attachment with someone. And then that becomes the building block for a lot of the other therapeutic work. There, like I did some EMDR with someone today, and I had done a lot of significant work with them before we worked on the
mm,
EMDR, because it needed to feel safe and secure. This strange thing that she's about to do to help my eyes refocus.
mm,
And it worked, but a large portion of how it worked was that I had built that safe and secure environment over and over and over with her.
mm. Yeah, and even using EMDR for some, I guess it's also a challenge because they see it as so unorthodox, right? Like this is
Right.
therapy, and so and it's cool to see the progress made after you go over those steps and target those memories and so on. And it's almost unexplainable, right? Like we can't really explain the process, but we know it's happening. We just don't know what
Yeah,
that click is.
it is. But if we recognize it's that stimulation that is going opposite to the neural pathway that already exists, right? So
Mm,
that neural pathway has our brain going the same way, same way, same way. Well, when
mm,
we're introducing this new thing, we're doing, let's go different, let's go different, let's
mm,
go different. And we're literally giving the brain, the amygdala, the ability to be unfrozen and to go places it couldn't go before. So it's all science. None of it's
mm.
wishy washy. Back in the 90s, they thought it was new age and witchcraft and all these types of things. But
That's right. That's right. It's
now,
crazy how times change with that.
now we're saying, oh, this is just brain science.
That's good. When I was thinking about the challenges, one of the challenges that I found is the patience needed when doing EMDR. Because if something doesn't come up for the client, they just want to answer and say, okay, yeah, something came up, or they'll say this or that. Or even just as a counselor, sometimes you're trying to get there and you're processing, you're like, we're nothing's coming up, nothing's coming up. So it's very easy to kind of lose that patience with the process, right? We always talk about
Mm.
trust the process, and it's hard. We have to be patient in that, as well as the clients.
I always say we have that divine Holy Spirit source to say, let's just sit here for a second. Let's see how God wants to redirect this.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right,
Holy
right.
Spirit can show us. He can show us what to do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm glad when that happens too, because sometimes I don't know where that came from, but it was good, and I know, Lord, you did
Yes.
it. So thank you.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Well, we have here the good, very meaty piece of this interview, Sharon, where we talk about the steps to take towards healing. So obviously, not everyone is able to go to counseling, or not everyone has gone to counseling. So maybe they're listening in right now, and maybe they take some pieces of information that we've discussed and try to move towards healing, right? And I think one of the things that I wanted to do is kind of remove that barrier of counseling is a bad thing, especially when I interact with other Christian counselors. I'm always happy when I get to meet other Christian counselors because it's doable. Like this field was dominated by secular counselors, and now we have so much research and so many other Christians moving into the field that there's room and there's space to work there. So I always want to encourage people to do that. But yeah, as we talk about steps to take towards healing, so someone out there, they're listening, and there's three things that we'll address here: body and emotional regulation, truthful thinking, and then the importance of Christian community. So can you just kind of open up the conversation for us on healing in regards to the body and emotional regulation? Because those things are usually linked.
Um, so what I'm thinking is um, body health is so important in the function of mental health, right? So one of the things I do when I leave work at each night, no matter how cold it is outside, is I want to do a really good walk to get my body regulated, right? What does that mean? I've just absorbed a lot of discussions involving a lot of trauma, right? And that's our world. That's our world on the news, on social media, in all the environments that we're in. We're absorbing lots of negative. Well, how is our body processing it? It's important to do the processing of it out of our body through exercise, through breathing, through other exercises that I personally do. And we want to do that because otherwise we'll have nightmares, we'll have bad sleep, it will impact how much we numb, it will impact so many parts of our being. So a lot of people don't recognize the need to take care of the body, to take care of their mental health. And yet when you don't have it, you recognize it. Like if I don't have my walk, I feel the difference in it based on whatever I've just had to absorb. So if we think about our world as being this what it's poured in is negative, we got to have an exit hole. And out of our body structure, I'm not advertising Starbucks, but out of our body structure and so what is that? That's exercise. It's doing the breathing work. It's doing the other somatic exercises that are going to get our body into a more calm state. So that's the body. Emotionally, I think it's really important. I talked about this several times that we do name what's going on in the course of our day, particularly in a safe environment. You know, if I have a client who has a person who's able to affirm them, validate them, empathize with them, give them comfort tied to those three things, I think it's so important to be able to name it and have it touched by love, right? Perfect love casts out fear. I kind of apply that to the idea of I have a trauma triggering event in the course of my day. If I don't let love touch it, where does it go? Right? So what I'm doing is I'm saying, if it's a person, I'm saying, here, this is what happened. This is what I thought. This is what I felt. This is what I want to do. And I'm having that person who's safe. But if we don't have a person, we have a God who wants to give us affirmation to our thing, to our situation, whatever it is, whatever our anxiety is. Sometimes I say, sometimes even I might wake up in the middle of the night and I might be anxious about a big decision or something. What do I turn to in the middle of the night? I'm going to turn to scriptures regarding anxiety, and I'm going to meditate on the word of God because he brings truth that's filled with his spirit, and that can impact me and I can go back to sleep. Right. So it's the body work, right? And it's the naming for the emotional, whether it's in a therapeutic setting or just in a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that too, Sharon, because one of the things that I've seen with my clients is that they don't have, when you talk about naming an emotion or an experience, they don't have language for it, right? Because, you mentioned earlier the numbness. So you could only feel this, right? And then when you're saying, but what else? Like it could have brought some other feelings. What else do you think could have brought? And this is just a range. And teaching them to experience or to have more vocabulary for it, it's been so helpful. And, I don't know if you've seen that as well, but
oh, yes,
such a struggle, and I get it, when you don't know what anything else feels like, you experience it, but you don't have a name for it. That's frustrating,
Right. That's a big common one with anger. Like a lot of people can name anger. And I'm like, okay, but anger is just the fruit of feeling invalidated, of feeling abandoned, of feeling rejected, of feeling shamed, maybe even powerless. So if I can make it like this is the plant up top, this is the anger, this is what we see, this is what we feel, but it really roots down from those things. So it's just naming the feelings that cause what we see on the surface, which generally is not really anger. It's really the invalidation. It's all the other things.
Yeah. Those secondary emotions really trick us sometimes. Yeah. Can you give us some steps on how to identify the body, where the body feels pain? Like there was, I don't know what you think about this, but there was some comments made. We were talking in our group in our team of counselors, and we were saying how there's so many people out talking about proposing theories about if you feel pain in your throat, then that probably means that you weren't allowed to speak up a lot when you were younger. If you feel something in your stomach, then that probably means that you didn't get to eat a lot when you were younger. So you're always anxious about that. Like, there are theories that
Yes, I've
we
seen
can make
those.
the connection, but you know what I mean?
I, you know what? I don't have an exact science for how it is since each of us have our own unique DNA.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen the books that name the different things, but God has never healed anyone twice the same way in the Bible, right? So my
Mm,
theory is that it's more of a self-discovery thing because if we follow like, well, this means this, then we're going to be trying to force our healing
mm,
through a box
great
that
point.
isn't
Yeah.
ours. It isn't ours. And so I think part of the self discovery process of recognizing, oh, every time we're talking about this, I feel it here. Oh, what are we talking about? Right. So
Mm,
often, so one of my big keys for like anybody who's learning to do therapy is I train all of my therapists. You're asking them, so I see what's happening. Why are you biting your lip right now? Oh, am I biting my lip right?
mm,
They should be naming what they see physically and asking the client multiple times in the course of a session, maybe
mm-hmm,
6 times. What are you feeling? Where is it? Because we want to begin to recognize the math of where it is and why it's there.
mm-hmm.
It's more important place of curiosity. I don't think there's, I understand some of the other theories, and I think some of them can be accurate, but I don't think most people fit in a box.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I'm so glad you mentioned that the process of healing is going to look different because you have different experiences, you have different support
Yes.
systems, different bodies,
Yes.
so many layers to the healing process that was just a great point. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, one of the questions that comes up is truthful thinking or thinking rightly, is that enough to bring healing? And I think part of this is first making sense of what we feel physically and emotionally, because what happens is that we could think logically through something, but the body is communicating something else, so there's a clash, right? So I think when you're
Yeah.
talking about the body and where to feel and how to identify certain things, I think that's the starting point. And then we can move into that truthful thinking, because now we're understanding that how our body works and how that attaches to our emotions, right? If we're tired, we get more cranky and so on. But then we can start implementing the truthful thinking. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the truthful thinking hopefully is involving another safe person because
Right.
I don't like anybody going to a place of trauma regarding with by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary. It's scary. So yes, truthful thinking is the end result of probably. So I'm going to put relationship in between there
Mm-hmm.
and truthful thinking because I feel like it's the safety that enables me to go there.
That's good. Yeah. So that would tie into the Christian community aspect. And
Yes. Yes. So people can't do this by themselves. I know
mhm,
everybody out there thinks that they can. You can't. It's
yeah.
not going to be, it's going to be this much instead of this much. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why we need a Christian community that is trauma informed, that is able to not push people into a box of how you're going to get healed or a box of what you should be doing right now, but is able to like sit with the person and just say, I'm here. Let's go there when you're
Mm-hmm.
ready, right? Not when I'm ready, when you're ready. And I think so. I think the Christian community is a huge piece of the puzzle, which is why we're so focused on trying to create trauma informed ministries and churches because they are an untapped resource in this world.
Mm-hmm.
There's more 501c3s and more churches in the
Mm-hmm.
world that if they all became trauma informed, we could change the world.
Mm.
But right now, we're still using lots of boxes.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. And the other thing that gets complicated too is that now we have people coming in who either grew up in the church or started going to a church and they were hurt by people within the church, right?
Yes,
So we
yes.
have them coming and now they want nothing to do with God, want nothing
Mhm.
to do with the church. So the trauma is healing that and how to reintegrate them back to what they actually need, which is that Christian community, but the one that they were at was not
Mm.
safe, right?
It's true. And And I think back to my own childhood, nobody understood the idea of trauma. And so when I listen to people's stories of the things that happened to them in the Christian community, I understand how it got there. I
Mm,
do. I understand how the church got there, but I also understand from the person who experienced it. We deal with a lot of spiritual trauma. I bet it's something that we talk about multiple times every day,
mm,
because the very people who are supposed to be the hands and feet of Jesus are inadvertently slapping and kicking the people. And that's not
mhm,
going to produce. And so, again, that's why we need trauma informed ministries, because when I teach them about this, they have these aha moments. Oh, okay, I can do that
mhm.
differently. Yes, yes, you can. But they just didn't know. They didn't
Right.
know what they didn't know. And that's most of what we deal with. They don't know what they don't
True, true. And to your point about when people are hurt by ministry leaders, do you think it would be better to start with ministry leaders first because they're guiding and guiding the
know.
sheep, the people who come to church, the pastors and so on. So if they're healthy, then
Yes,
it's highly likely that their people will also be healthy.
absolutely. And what I often share when I'm asked to speak places is I don't think we understand how much trauma church leaders themselves have absorbed into
Mm,
their person. A lot of them are very traumatized. In fact, in the Christian community, they are literally the first responders.
mm,
And the end result is they are doing first responder care without having trauma
mm,
or counseling care. And so the
right.
end result is while I want to work with the leaders first, many of them are very shut down
Mm,
in recognizing what is going on inside of them, or they might be more overreactive over here. And so what I'm trying to do when I explain this to various groups that I'm dealing with is we need to recognize that this is a very traumatized population, and they don't know they're traumatized. They just know they're
mm,
burning out. So statistically, we know that a lot of them are burning out. I mean,
mhm,
45% of pastors want to quit as a result of COVID. That's a lot of people who are absorbed trauma and
mhm.
they don't know what to do except for escape.
Yeah, yeah. And the even sadder part of that is that it's in their minds, it's this is my suffering for the Lord, right? It's this
Yes.
is this is me sacrificing my life for the Lord. And which is noble and good, but not
Mhm.
realizing that you being at that state is also affecting the people that you're trying to lead. So it
Yes.
really is bringing that idea around that it is okay to ask for help and necessary even you know
Yes.
Mm,
Because you can only extend healing to the same level you yourself have
mhm,
extended healing, which is why Jesus could heal all those people when he was here on earth, right? And his
mhm.
disciples struggled when they went out. But the
Yeah,
end
that's good.
result is, you can only heal people to that same level. So when I'm talking to pastors, I'm just naming their trauma for them, trying to help them identify it by just saying it out loud.
Hmm.
Well, I'm sure that's a really difficult, that was a very traumatic situation. I'm sure that really, that was a lot to absorb. I'm naming it for them. Again, I'm trying to be that safe person that says, it's okay. I
Hmm.
understand. I'm validating that. And I think that the church itself doesn't know how to validate the
Yeah,
pain that church leaders, ministry leaders have absorbed. And so we also have to have compassion on them too.
yeah, yeah. Everyone's fighting a separate battle there, but we can try to provide help for each of them. Oh, that's
Mhm.
good. I really appreciate the work that you're doing, Sharon. When I read through your bio and read through the stuff that you're doing, very encouraged by it. Keep up doing the good work, and I know the
Thank
Lord
you.
is using you greatly. And yeah, do you have any final thoughts as we kind of close out here? It's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed chatting with you. But yeah, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say that God designed your body for healing. In the same way he designed your body for being alarmed, he also designed your body for healing. He
Mm,
has created systems that create healing in a person's body, soul, and spirit. And I think it's important to recognize you're not broken, but you can be healed, because in the same way he created the alarm system is the same way he's created pathways for healing.
Well, thank you so much, Sharon, for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate it. I know the audience is going to enjoy our conversation and hopefully take some nuggets of wisdom or of healing with them.
Yes.
But hopefully I get to have you on some other time. And
Yes.
just thank you for your time.
My privilege. Have a great day.